1, 2. Hello fellow CNCnutz, and welcome. Since last weekend when I showed my Aztec calendar on the CNC show with Dave, I've been inundated with requests for where you can get the files to make one and how do you actually finish a project like this. Now, I made this one here 5 years ago, and let me tell you, it's been invaluable, telling me when to plant and harvest my crops, as well as when to make sacrifices to the CNC gods. No self-respecting CNC machinist should be without one. And it's almost a rite of passage, once you've got your machine built, to actually make one of these. So I'm going to show you how to make an Aztec calendar. So I'm cutting this from a piece of 18mm or 3/4 inch MDF. It's about 2 foot square, 600 mils. Now, to make it easier to see, I've given this a coat of shellac which will provide a contrast as it's cutting. I'm using a 90-degree VBit cutter, and I'm setting my origin point to the center of my material. The cutter needs to be set to the surface of this material. Time for the big reveal. Or it would be if we could see it. Just get out the vacuum cleaner. Well, that's not too bad at all. Now, believe it or not, the preparation for this job didn't start last week when I decided I'd make an Aztec calendar. It started 8 years ago before I even heard about Aztec calendars. It was when I brought this VBit. Now, like MDF and other wood products you buy, the thickness of those are a nominal value, and the same applies to these. This is a 90-degree VBit, you hope. But the reality is, when you're doing V-carving, you need to know exactly what value that cutter is. Now, I know that this is actually an 89-degree VBit, and let's face it, this was designed to put into a hand router and putting some bevels on the edge of a project. However, when you're doing a V-carve, it is absolutely critical that you know the exact angle of your cutter. Now, there's a really easy way of doing that, and I'm going to show you how. I'll put a piece of scrap MDF onto the tabletop. It's 3/4 inch thick or 18mm. I'll put the 90-degree VBit into the collet here, and I've zeroed it to the surface of the material. It's now time to run the test file. Now, this isn't very easy to see on the video, but when you're looking at this close up, you can see that these ones here, the 95, these edges curve in like this here, and same with the 94, 93, and the curve inwards is getting less pronounced as we get closer to the 90 degrees here. Now on the 85, 86, 87, the problem is the opposite. These lines curve outwards, and it gets less pronounced the closer we get to 90 degrees. Now when I have a close look at them, the 90 still has a slight inward curve. I can't see any on the 89 here, and the 88 looks pretty good as well. I'm not really sort of seeing it there, maybe just slightly. So you need to choose the cutter at the angle that gives you the best result on this triangle and on the lettering as well, though the lettering doesn't really show any issues. It's really these triangles that really show up the issue. So in my case, my cutter is an 89 degree cutter rather than a 90. Now I can't take credit for the technique of testing those cutters, nor even for making that 90 degree file. It's something I downloaded from somewhere and I just can't remember where, but a big thank you to the person who did provide those files and showed the technique for how to test your VBit. I didn't have a version for a 60 degree cutter, so I drew one of those up, and I'll put both of those files on my website to where you can download and test your own cutter. And if you don't think it's worth testing, come back and tell me what you think after 3 hours of engraving and your calendar doesn't look any good. Now if you have a choice between a 90 degree VBit and a 60 for cutting this year, pick the 60. It'll come out a bit better. Those deeper grooves created by the 60 degree VBit, especially in the narrower parts, will make it a lot easier to paint later on. Now the more observant of you will notice that I made 2 calendars. That's because I've always wanted to try out a different technique for finishing it. I have here a stone fleck spray paint, and I want to see what a calendar would look like when sprayed with it. I have a horrible feeling I'm going to lose quite a lot of detail from the calendar, but I've always wanted to find out what it will look like, and the best way of doing that is to actually do it. The other calendar, of course, I'll use to finish with the technique I used on my previous one, and that should come out looking pretty good. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.CNCnutz.com. In the meantime, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you later. Cheers!